The Education Ministry is planning to reinstate a nationwide testing of academic progress of students in all grades, with the exception of first and second grades at primary schools, by the year 2024. So why is the government seeking to re-adopt an assessment system that was abandoned in 2017? What are the pros and cons of such standardized testing? And how is academic achievement assessed elsewhere? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today we address the role of standardized tests in the academic arena and ways to enhance the learning experience amid a new pandemic normal. For more, I have Professor Park Namgi at Gwangju National University of Education. Professor Park, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to me.
Right. I also have Professor Michal Kurlaender at the University of California, Davis. Professor Kurlaender, it's good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Professor Park, we'll start with you then. Let's start with some background information. Why is the government bent on bringing back this nationwide academic assessment test, which was essentially abandoned back in the year 2017? And what are your thoughts on this government plan?
Yeah, actually, year 2017, they stopped the whole nationwide test and they changed it to the sampling test. It's only for 3% students. And based on that sampling test, they found out that the number of students increasing who are failing to achieve the minimum level of academic attainment. So that is the main reason to rebuild the new system. And the new testing system, which is called Autonomous Evaluation of Academic Achievement, is different from the former testing system in the point that it's not required to all schools or students forced to participate in. So under the new testing system, schools and even individual classes can decide whether to participate in the test or not. And furthermore, it is a computer-based test that you can take anytime you want as long as the system is open. And so in my point of view, I recommend students to take this test if you want to know your academic achievement level. And I think teachers and parents should encourage them to take this test. But it's not forced or required as of now.
Right, I see. Professor Kurlaender, I understand California also accommodates a similar academic assessment system known as the Smarter Balanced Assessment System. Could you tell us a bit about it and also a bit about your thoughts on the merits and perhaps demerits of standardized tests in general?
Sure. So I will start by saying all states in the U.S. are required to offer some assessments of students to measure progress in learning. That's required by the U.S. Department of Education. In California, those are the Smarter Balance assessments, and they measure the standards that California has for its students from grades 3rd through 8th and in 11th grade. Just as Professor Park mentioned, ours are also computer adaptive. That is, they adjust to the student's prior knowledge on answering questions. And they also grade students on a level of standard not met, standard met, exceeded, or nearly met. And those tests, again, are untimed. And so students have, theoretically enough time to complete them to measure progress in English language arts and in mathematics. And the issue that you raise around the benefits and the opposition on tests, it's important to note that tests offer really important information on how our schools are doing. And so they're required partly to measure how schools are doing in measuring the standards or in teaching the standards that we have for each grade. Now, the controversy is how much they matter for students. Importantly, these tests give a signal to students and their parents about how their child is doing. But for schools, they're really important because they allow us to grade schools on meeting those standards. Have they gotten most of their students to meet those standards or even exceed those standards?
Right. And Professor Park, in reference to what you mentioned earlier, some pundits believe that recent findings that show a relative decline in basic scholastic ability among students here is largely owing to learning disruptions caused by the pandemic. Now, is this the main reason, or are we looking at a greater fundamental problem, do you think?
Yes, I think pandemic is a catalyst for the decline in basic scholastic ability of middle and low-level students. It's not for the high-level student. And however, the root cause is not that. It's the causes of the decline in academic ability are the neglect of knowledge education by teachers, led by some superintendents in Korea, and the suspension of paper-based tests and the requirements for ill-prepared students to conduct self-directed learning. These students typically have not reached the basic scholastic ability, and they couldn't have education that fits to them, such as basic knowledge learning led by teachers. And all these kind of things mixed together for last 10 years, and in the end, we have this kind of problem. Like you know, during the pandemic, who has the basic illness, they are the person who are attacked by the COVID strongly, and it was same in the education field also, who are low or middle level students are attacked by the pandemic, I think.
Right, and staying with the pandemic, Professor Kurlaender, what have been the broader implications of COVID-19 on academic progress there in the US?
Yeah, so I would say there's been several important trends. The first is our schools in the US largely shut down for nearly a year until vaccines were available, and other than a few cases. And so what you had was very uneven access to education. Schools were not equally equipped to provide strong instruction remotely. Teachers were not equally equipped to do that as well. And so students received very different levels of access to education. And similarly, students who were of lower ability or who depended more on schools for resources of education suffered more greatly, right? So students whose families come from higher income backgrounds who were able to provide tutoring or access to other types of educational experiences didn't fare as badly in the pandemic as those who really rely on the school for a majority of their educational environments. And the second big trend is that many students disengaged from school, and so it's difficult to sort of re-engage students. Many students in high school didn't even necessarily complete, and we're seeing big declines in access to college, and that is fewer students are enrolling in college as a result of the pandemic.
Right, and speaking about college, Professor Park, here on the local front, we are counting down less than a month now to the nation's college scholastic ability test, Sunung, known in Korean, of course, which is essential for entry into university here in the country. That being said, how do you respond, Professor Park, to calls for essential changes in criteria with regard to college application to include perhaps more focus on presentation opportunities instead of perhaps standardized test scores?
I think in the long run we'll need it, but we should not hurry that too much because the school need time to prepare for that, and students also. So, and in order for the interview system works, several supplementary measures must be prepared. First, we must strengthen the interviewers' capacity to conduct more interviews efficiently and secure enough personnel. But university is not well ready yet. And if there are not enough and able interviewers or not enough training provided to existing interviewers, then interview process may be too subjective, like we can imagine. And as a result, interviewers may not agree on the score assigned to an individual, and the distribution of scores assigned by interviewers may not be the same, which essentially invalidate the process. Also, the number of people evaluated by the interviewers should be limited. Otherwise, it will be exhausting and difficult to maintain the same standard evaluation. In order for that, universities should put more money on a student admission process, but I think they don't have enough money for that. In that case, government should support them. If not, then it will not work well. And second, sufficient interview time per students or team should be secured. As of now, usually they use 7 or 10 minutes, and I think it's not enough. And third, like I told you, since students were having and there are existing strengths or innate talent in interviews have an advantage, And the government must also create a policy that considers students who are not good at interviews. As a way around this issue, it would be reasonable to delay the incorporation of the new interview scores from 2024, I think, to 2029. That is, as of now, sixth graders will be the university student at the time. So this will allow the school system to train students in preparing for the interview process, I think.
Right, give them some more time then, of course. Professor Kurlaender, I believe quite a number of universities there in the US have dropped requirements for standardized test scores, including those for the SAT and the ACT for application. Simply speaking then, Professor Kurlaender, in the absence of a common testing system to measure academic standing, what factors are now being considered in the selection process?
Yeah, it's an important question because the pandemic has actually paused the use of testing and across many colleges and universities. The biggest factor, which has always been the biggest predictor of college success used by colleges and universities in admission, is high school performance. That is, how students perform in their high school courses is the best guess we have at how they will perform in college. And so that remains the number one predictor. But again, there's a lot of differences. There are a lot of differences across high schools in the US, even in my state alone. And so colleges and universities also have to address the fact that students have access to different types of courses depending on the high school they go to. Grade distributions are different depending on the high schools they go to. And so colleges also take account a variety of context factors of the high school that students are applying from. U.S. colleges and universities also look for a well-rounded student, that is a student beyond their academics. Do they play sports? Do they do music or art? Or do they have to work to help support their families or volunteer? And so they don't have to do all of those things, but they do look for students abilities, traits, leadership, beyond just how they perform in their academic subjects.
Right, I see. Professor Park, I realize this may be a tough question, but what do you propose perhaps to ensure a productive learning experience at schools in general?
Okay. Most important fact is teachers. I wrote a book titled The Art of the Best Teaching. In that book, I argue that the art of the best teaching practices is not a special teaching skill or method. Instead, it is the ability to learn and utilize various techniques that are suitable for the teachers, the students, the content to be taught, and the purpose of teaching. So when teachers are well prepared, surely teachers can ensure productive learning at schools. So as an example, analogy, a teacher can become Iron Man, you know Iron Man, when the teacher suits up with educational technology, as long as the teacher understands how to use the technology effectively, I think. So most important factor is teachers, and they should have well equipped with what I call the best art of the teaching.
Right, I see. And Professor Kurlaender, I extend the same question to you. What can be done to allow for a constructive classroom experience?
I think I would say the biggest one is student engagement, that we know much less. We have performance measures, but we know much less about how students think and experience the classroom. And as a university professor, I could tell you that that is one of the biggest things we look for, is for students who think creatively, are able to integrate different types of information to make a claim, think about other people's points of view that may be different than their own. And some of that is not really taught in our K-12 system more as fully as it can be. And so I agree, a teacher is one of the, if not the most important input, but what happens in the classroom to facilitate student engagement and participation is another.
Right, I see. And Professor Park, this is an impromptu question, but speaking to a local media, you spoke about the importance perhaps of adopting an education system that you dubbed as smart analog, I believe. Could you tell us a bit more about your thoughts regarding that?
Beg your pardon, so you mean the...
Smart and analog, ways to address, right. You were speaking to a local media recently about that.
Okay, yeah. The new paradigm of education is smart plus analog, means one of I told you, even though we come back to the class and face-to-face the teaching, it doesn't mean we go back to the before. So even though we meet the student in the classroom, we have to overcome the limitation of the classroom, the spatially or the timely. So if we use the education technology, we can do all those different kind of things. So during the classroom teaching, we can use all kind of technology. Also, what I suggest is you should not teach, you don't need to teach alone. Through the technology, you can use any important people. You can invite through the Zoom or any Google Meet, whatever, so they can come in like we do it now. And we can teach them through them. So my small log education paradigm means now, in order to teach our student, whole global village people can help each other, and we can together, then it will be wonderful.
Right,
so
of course.
I tell that, yeah, students should have the parents, teachers, and mentor in the global village. Then
right, of course. They say it takes a village to bring up a child. I see where you're coming from. All right, Professor Park, thank you very much for your thoughts. And Professor Kurlaender, over in the US, thank you very much for your insights today.
My pleasure.
Okay, thank you.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.